Hello, everyone.
All right. Hello. This is the kubeadm office hours. Today is the 12th of May 2021. I'm going to share my screen with the agenda. Just a second. All right. So the first item we have is discussion around the CAP, which is for an implementation of a rootless control plane in kubeadm. Basically, we had a discussion yesterday with Vinayak and on Slack. Basically, the big question was, where should we put this? Like, where should we put the logic for allocating these new users on a particular host? And how are we supposed to manage this? Like, the idea that he proposed was to do this as part of the pre-flight phase. But my argument for that was that against that is that pre-flight should not be mutating, even if it's only, we already have broken the rule because we are pulling images. That's host mutation because it's downloading stuff on the node. But ideally, it should only contain checks.
One thing I want to mention was that what I recommended was that it runs after the pre-flight phase completes. So like from what I can see in the code is that its first pre-flight runs, then I think certs, there's a certs phase that runs, and then there's like a kube config phase, and then start kubelet phase, and then control plane phase that runs as part of the init itself.
Yes.
So
go ahead.
So what I was recommending is that like even the init is divided into like these several phases, and so initially I thought it'd be a good idea to just add another phase there, but then like I think the thing that you recommended, that we do it as part of the control plane phase inside the init phase, I think that is the right way to do it in this one, because all the files that we need have already been created at that point, and they're all available as part of like the default arguments that that we pass to the commands, right? So I think that would be a good place to like put it, because all the files necessary to run the pods are already been created. All the folders are set up. So all we need to do is create the users create the users and the groups, and then just as we assign, as we place the files in the command to say like, oh, this is the CAcert file, you also like have some logic there that says if the feature flag is enabled, then I need to change the ownership of the file to the specified user.
Yes, I was also thinking about this last night a little. The idea was also to make this part of reset, so the users can execute reset and remove the same users and groups. If this is a phase in init, and if this is a phase in reset, users could do it on demand, which is kind of nice. But if we hardcore it as part of the control plane phases, which is the control plane and etcd, they're separate phases. If we do it, then the creation of the users and groups will be implicit, which is a bit of a limitation. From what I've seen from users always want the full control. Even if we hardcore it a bunch of stuff, for instance, in kubelet start, we have some, not in this kubelet start, but the one for join, we hardcore it a bunch of stuff in there, and users are not happy that we are hardcoring so many things in the same phase. They're not happy that these are not separate phases. So what do you think about the alternative solution, which we think is to have a separate phase after etcd, potentially, like a mutating phase after this one?
To be honest, I I prefer to not add phases at least in the first iteration. So I explain why. The user has to opt in using a feature flag for this feature. And that means that it is already explicit that he wants kubeadm to do so. So I think that it makes sense to start and basically embed what we need in the existing phases, both for kubeadm init, join, and reset. And eventually we can iterate and create separate phases before going to beta when we know better the problem domain.
That's a good argument. But it's a maintenance. It increases the maintenance. We have to refactor it after that for the beta.
I prefer take this risk than expose a phase, then we have to move, rearrange, deprecate, stuff like that.
Actually, that's a very good point, because when we add a phase, it's a GA contract almost, unless it's experimental, which is a problem, then we have to rename it, because we always prefix with experimental, like for instance, this one. At some point it has to be removed and we have to add cert rotation as the phase name. So I think what Fabrizio is talking about is a good idea, and your proposal at the beginning, Vinayak, is to hard code the logic as part of these.
Yeah, that also kind of answers my second question, which was like, that could we merge the etcd and control plane phases into one if etcd is local? But I think that would again be like a very large GA contract change, which we probably wouldn't want. So yeah, then it's totally fine. I think like what I have is like everything in the control plane running as non-root on my like testing thing. So like it's not a hard or like ugly change to implement just in control plane. But I do want to run the idea by people who are way more experienced than me in kubeadm and like it's the properties and like the contract that it shares. So yeah, like I think I agree with the Fabrizio here that like adding it into control plane is probably the good starting point.
Yeah, at least is the starting point with less friction now. And I have a question. Sorry, I reviewed the cap, but I am reviewing too many cap in this time and don't remember detail. Are we going to create a different credential for each component? Different user ID for each component?
Yes, each component will run with a unique user ID, and then some files that different user IDs need to access, we'll create a common group. And all these user IDs and groups are going to be system groups. And I've already following like best practices for creating groups and users, which is like, don't give them a home directory, don't give them any ability to log in using that user. So I think we're already doing that when I'm creating the user.
Okay, great. So that means that we can nicely break down the process by phases.
Yes, like if we wanted to, we could do this, which is kind of, I think, like looking at the code, I think the idea of phases is that you do something and then the next phase does not have to like, there is no state that kind of lives other than the cluster configuration, right? So we could introduce a phase which is like create the users, right? Which just creates the users, but then the control plane phase will just assume that that has been done. But then you're kind of coupling those two phases anyways, so you might as well just move the code into one phase.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I think that we have to create the user for the API server inside the API server phase, create a user for controller manager inside the controller manager phase, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening today. Like if you, at least in the code changes that I have on my machine, it's basically like I think there's a function that says create static pods or something like that, and you pass in the name of the components. Like you can pass a list of components there, and only those components that are passed in by that list are created.
Okay.
But then one of the issues with that thing is that, like, if you don't pass all of them, right? So let's say you pass in Kube API server only, but you don't pass in, for some reason, the user doesn't pass in like controller manager and scheduler. Now, what happens when you run Kube API server as non-root, but Kube controller manager is running as a root? The good thing is that Kube API server will still be able to access everything, because we will change the file permissions based on Kube API server. And since controller manager is running as root, it can anyways access any file created by any user. So it won't be like a problem there as well. I tested that scenario where I forced, I never run Kube controller manager as non-root, and it still works.
Yeah.
So I think that code change was.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I'm not really concerned about this scenario, because the idea is that if the user basically opt out to run Kube controller manager from kubeadmin, it means that he is basically taking care of controller manager. So it's not our concern. But yeah, great to hear the test. My only reminder is that we don't have only to take care of init, but we have also to take care of join control plane.
Yeah.
So what's the concern in join specifically?
So, in kubeadmin, we can basically create an HA cluster where we add a second control plane node. Okay, and I guess that the expectation is also that the second control plane node basically work as a non-root if we set the flag.
Yes, because the feature gate is cluster global.
Exactly. That means that your code should kick in also when you basically run join control plane. This should be, if you are doing the implementation like you just explained, so you are basically implementing where we create the static root. At the end, the code paths are the same, but we have to test it.
Okay, so when you say join control plane, you mean like another machine joins it, or it's the same machine with another control plane on it?
No, it is another machine.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That joins the cluster
Gotcha.
as a control plane, not as a worker.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I got confused. I thought like if we ran like another, so the only scenario that like I see will break is like if you run another control plane on the same machine, like but I think that's not a valid scenario anyways. So yeah, okay. And one last question I had was about the patching, right? Like, so what I know from the code is that like first we put in all the defaults, right? And then we create the command. And then right at the end, once the static part, like once we have the pod created or fully filled in all the fields that we want to fill in, after that, we call like patch based on what the user requests. So in the scenario where the user requests, like let's say they want to like override the location where the certs are stored for some reason, then they are going to have to manage the file permissions, right? And that's like an expectation we today also hold.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Patching also, I was making a mistake earlier because patching is part of these phases. So patching should be last. It's like it should be the last step over the manifest file. So potentially your logic to pin the UID and GID should be before the patching. Like patching should be the last user control.
Yes.
They can apply. And at that point, it's out of our control what they are going to do with specific UIDs and folders.
Yeah, okay. So that's what I wanted to be explicit. Like maybe we should also call that when we update the documentation, we should probably call that like if you're patching it, you are responsible for permission, like file permissions. If the feature flag is enabled, just so that it's more explicit, I guess.
Yeah, we usually don't add documentation for alpha features, but we can add this for this one. It's not a strict rule.
Gotcha. Okay, sounds good. That was all my questions and concerns. Thank you so much for all your help.
No problem. Thank you. I wanted to ask the more generic questions, like what use do you have for kubeadm in? Maybe it's related to kind. Like, what is the use case on your side for this?
On Well, so I have been working like mostly in security space to like kind of promote people running containers as non-root. And when I joined this like Kubernetes security space, I found that like despite having a lot of tools to start a cluster, to do stuff like there's kubeup and there's kubeadmin, uh, even Kubernetes wasn't really enforcing its own like best practices. So my motivation for like why I kind of did it for kubeadmin was like I know like a lot of customers use it, like customers who are like and a lot of like cloud providers also use it. And if we add an easy ability for a cluster to start with non-root, it promotes just it educates other developers to kind of, hey, yeah, we should run our containers as non-root as well. The other thing is why I want to do this. I also want to call out is in the security community, like, look, there are challenges to running controllers as containers and non-root, and we should kind of implement some of the things that we kind of haven't implemented, like ambient capabilities. We always talk about, like, if we do ambient capabilities, running kube API server as non-root and binding to like a low port, which is a completely valid scenario for kube API server, right, would become way easier for a lot of customers. And even Kubernetes, in doing it for kubeup, we ran through like we had to go through several hoops to do it for kubeup. So that's mainly my motivation. And like in our company, I think we definitely we use kubeadmin for a few products where we use it to like bootstrap clusters and also use kind. So like we use kind, but like if you use kind, you're kind of using kubeadmin. So like because the bootstrap is done by kubeadmin there. We wanted to promote that because we wanted us. I think we're kind of moving towards using kind for like a lot of cluster bootstraps rather than shell scripts, because it's like easier to use the libraries and like write Go code and test it and be able to make sure like you're testing your framework. Like it's very hard to test shell scripts well. So that's something I'm promoting. But then I was like, like I will have to go do a lot of custom work to bring in like rootless changes to run these things as rootless. So I wanted to build that into kubeadmin so that it becomes easier and more people can also use it, right? I don't just want to do it for my company. I want to do it for like everybody. So that it becomes very easy. And the community kind of realizes that, oh yeah, if like we're running all our controllers, all our components as non-root. So maybe we should go try as well. And it'll serve as an example too. Because it's very complicated. Like the capabilities and everything in Kubernetes is kind of complicated. And I don't think a lot of people really understand it well. And so like if we use it and we create good examples, I think there'll be more adoption.
Well, thank you very much. This work for kubeadm and kubeup is greatly appreciated. And I see that you're basically advocating for the whole Kubernetes project to apply some of these best practices. So that's great. Right. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, just ping me on Slack, or we can have another meeting next week. Sorry, in a couple of weeks about this. I may have to drop in a few minutes. Fabrizio, I wanted to show you like what is the status of the V1 Beta 3 PRs. And I'm going to continue sending PRs. We are facing a bit of a problem with review. I know that you are very busy. Some of our contributors from China are also apparently busy. So we are technically without reviewers at this point.
Don't worry. If I'm not answering, tag me and I will put it on. It's just yeah. I'm struggling with the influx of notification, but if you need a review, ping me.
Okay.
I'm committed to make V1 Beta 3 to happen. So I'm super happy. You are doing all the heavy lifting, but I'm here to support you.
Okay, let me do a quick summary of the pending PRs. So, to give you some context, I'm not going to open the diff, but just to give you a state, I added the support for skipping phases in this PR. The diff is very small. It ended up being an easy change, the way it is, minus unit tests, and I don't think we need them that much. But if you have a strong argument for unit tests, we have to do a much bigger refactor. The diff is easy to read. It's a simple change for this one. Remove. So this is very sketchy. I tried multiple times, and we had a meeting about this on private. Basically, I ended up with some sort of a state where we have to keep the internal DNS type, but it's removed in V1 beta 3. And kind of the fuzzing and converters are a bit sketchy, but have a look. If you don't like it, I can try again. But honestly, I think I spent something like 6 hours on this trying to get it right, but it's still not.
Okay, I remember reviewing it, and the result seems good to me, but probably something it changed.
Yeah, because we did the other change, which was to stop defaulting inside the converter. It created some complications here, and it's not really possible to to fuzz separate public versions individually, because we are still fuzzing an internal version in the end of the day. Yeah, it's just have a look, but it's and honestly, the way this is, we already have changes in the V1 beta 3 conversion function, because V1 beta 3 is missing a field, right? So I think the way this is, I mean, it's tolerable. It's not great, but it works. The biggest problem again was to make the fuzzers happy, and a feature request that I have for the fuzzing logic is to be able to determine what is the context of the fuzzing. Like, what are we fuzzing? What are we round tripping? Because right now, if I pass a internal cluster configuration, right, this function is used to fuzz a public type, but I don't know what is the public type. If I knew, I could default, I can pin some fields differently. And that's not possible today. But yeah, that's the other issue. Have a look if you have the time. So this is the one for CRDs to have the plus optional on omit or empty. I broke this down in a couple of commits. The first commit is doing the plus optional, which we want. But the other one is the object meta. I'm adding object meta, and I'm starting to really not like it because we don't need it. And Vince added some comments here. He's also asking, like, why do we need this? I don't think we need it. And you can have a look, but honestly, I think I should drop this second commit.
Let's have a look. So I will schedule some time tomorrow morning to go through these PRs.
All right. Basically, I'm saying that if the kubeadm types move to a CRD eventually, to a custom resource, maybe at that point we can have object meta, because these fields are these types are going to be managed by the API server. Today, object meta is not really needed.
Yeah, if I remember well, object meta was required by people using Customize.
Yes, that's the only argument, and I don't think we should do it, because these are not. It's a customized problem. It's not a kubeadm problem, and also the cap for object meta never merged, so we are following the rules technically. Remove cluster status.
Which cap? Sorry, which cap? The cap for component config object meta.
Yeah. There's I don't remember who created this cap. It was so long ago. But basically, I remember API machinery just blocking on this gap, saying that component config does not care about object meta. And they are right in a way.
They're right in a way and not right in some other ways. But yeah, I got your point.
If you want object meta, you have to understand that maybe we should do a custom one, not a full object meta, and maybe we should not embed it in terms of structure and structure embedding. We should just have a pointer inside the structures. You know, type meta is embedded, object meta is not embed object meta. Because we have conflict, we have conflicts in the cluster name. Rosti had some hacks around this. Just have a look, but I think we don't need it at this point.
Okay.
Cluster status, this one, the API change itself was easy, but some of the logic, some of the logic that Rafael had around so we use annotations, but then we fall back to cluster status. That was what we had, right? This is not, I made changes to that. I think my logic is correct, but definitely somebody has to take a look because I'm changing code, actual code. The API change itself is pretty simple. And this, the converters was simple. The change in the route converters was simple. It's just this needs a review around the retries and fetch logic. Well, it's a very nice cleanup, actually. Also, another problem here. We have phases that are called update status. So when you add a new control plane node, you have to update the cluster status. That was the case before, right? You have to update the cluster status in the whole cluster. And in this case, this is no longer needed because the static pod will become a mirror pod that will have the annotation. But we have phases for this already. So the phases are
and we did not deprecate them.
Yeah, but they become a no operation at this point. And in this PR actually I deprecate them because they do nothing.
Makes sense. Yeah, we forgot to deprecate them when we deprecated basically cluster status. That was a mistake.
Yeah, and now I cannot close the issue with this PR. I have to keep them for 3 releases at least. But yeah, that's one side effect of this change in particular. The other one is the retries and finally the API change. But you can have a look. That's the current state of pending PRs. Now the rest are really low priority, but for this one I'm seeing a lot more. Like, do you have a quick comment on this one? Like for patches and config?
My opinion is no. Unless we find a way to validate what we put in the config. So what I don't like is putting in the config a blob of YAML, basically nesting some YAML in the config because you don't have it is just hard to manage.
It is.
I think that we should not go for this one. It is also a low priority. I think that
well, actually, I don't think it's that low priority because of Cluster API. Currently, there's no way to customize some aspects on the node, such as requests on the static pods, for instance. The only way to declaratively, the only way to do it is to bake patches and execute some sort of a kubeadm post
Yeah,
command.
but if I remember well, there are no issue for asking to tune a request.
Well, the Kubernetes bug that the Azure people found could have been easily mitigated with patches. The one with ephemeral storage.
Yeah, but my point is the following: is that patch is a kind of advanced feature that it should be the escape patch when you have a problem. So now we are piling up two questions. So one is that it is not easy in Cluster API to leverage on this escape patch. Because Cluster API hides something which is exposed by copy. And this is not a problem of by kubeadm, sorry. This is not a problem of kubeadm, it's a problem of API modeling in copy. So maybe that what is in kubeadm is already okay, but we are hiding it in Cluster API. Second is that there are discussion about putting patches in our configuration, because our configuration now is basically global configuration. So that means that we are covering some use cases for the patches, but not all. I'll make you an example. If you want to patch the bind address of your machine, you have to make a different patch for each node. And this won't be possible if we add patches to the cluster configuration, because cluster configuration is shared across all the nodes.
Yeah, but my point was not to add them in the cluster configuration. The patches are targeting init in join configuration only.
Yeah, but init and join configuration, and then how do you manage upgrades? Because init
we don't have upgrade. We don't have upgrade configuration.
Exactly. So the problem of init and join configuration is that init and join configuration are kind of volatile. They basically disappear when the operation is completed. And that means that your patches are lost.
Perhaps the compromise is to at least allow passing the patch folder inside the init and join configuration, which is consistent with the flag.
We can discuss this. It could be a mean that the user basically don't have to create a file locally, but we keep a file from the config and then we store them locally, and then for upgrades we do upgrades using a well-known folder. Patches in a well-known folder. This could be an option, but we have to think about it.
I mean, the clock is ticking for the remaining of the cycle. Like, what do you see as from these items? Which one is like the highest priority for you?
What about Lubomir? If we schedule a meeting, because so now we are basically at the enhancement freeze for the cycle, right?
Yeah.
And then there are 3 weeks for implementation, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, I think.
Okay, what if we schedule some time, even 1 or 2 times a week, starting from now to the end of the week? So I have so we have time to close these topics, to dig into, close these topics, and collect feedback.
Okay. Yeah, next week we have a meeting with you. I think we can discuss some of these.
Yeah, but please feel free to add more in those 3 weeks, so we are sure that we keep things moving as much as possible.
Okay, I'm going to do some of probably go with this one. I'm going to work on some of these PRs, but have them as work in progress. I'm going to have to drop, but thank you for joining, and I'm going to have a kubeadm meeting again in a couple of weeks. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.